I never imagined burying my son at 5 years old. No parent does. Yet there I was, standing in front of Noah's small white casket, his favorite blue blanket tucked inside with him because he always said it made him feel safe. Safe. Something I failed to give him when it mattered most. The weight of that realization crushed me more than the whispers of the people in the pews behind me. They weren't just mourning Noah. They were judging me, dissecting my life with Claire. I could feel their stares burning into the back of my head, their speculation like daggers. Where's his wife? I imagined them saying, how could she not be here? Small towns thrive on gossip, and I knew my absence wouldn't be the only topic of conversation anymore. No, now they had Claire's glaring absence to feast on. But the town didn't know what I did. Only minutes before stepping into the church, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I glanced at it out of reflex, expecting condolences or another logistical question about the service. Instead, what I saw made my blood run cold. The picture was so sharp it could have been taken moments ago. Claire, lounging by a pool, her skin glowing under the Hawaiian sun. A man, young, tanned, and smug, had his arm around her. A cocktail sat in her manicured hand. Below the photo, the message read, "Thought you should see what your wife is really doing today. A concerned friend." For a moment, the image didn't compute. My brain refused to link the woman I had built a life with to the person in that photo. Claire wasn't at an important business meeting, like she'd told me. She wasn't sitting at the front row of our son's funeral, holding my hand. She was sipping margaritas in paradise, tangled up with some stranger. The weight of betrayal was immediate, but there was no time to process it. My mother's hand gripped my arm as she whispered, "Jacob, you're shaking." I was. The phone trembled in my hand until I shoved it into my pocket, like burying it could make it disappear. It didn't. That image was burned into my mind, taunting me every time I blinked. Still, I couldn't break down. Not now. I swallowed the rage clawing up my throat and nodded at the funeral director. Somehow, my legs carried me to the front pew, and I sat where Claire should have been. I kept my head high, shoulders square, refusing to give the town the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. But my thoughts were anything but composed. They raced through the past few months, desperately trying to connect dots I hadn't noticed before. Claire's late-night calls. Her sudden work trips that always seemed urgent. The way she started talking about needing space when Noah's condition worsened. I had chalked it up to grief, thinking we were handling things differently. I'd been a fool. As the service began, I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms to keep from losing it. The pastor spoke about Noah's love for life, his boundless energy even during the hardest days of his illness. My chest tightened when he mentioned Noah's favorite pastime, coloring his white roses with food dye. I could almost see him again, his small hands stained blue and purple, his giggle filling the hospital room. My eyes flicked to the bouquet on his casket, white roses as far as the eye could see. Claire hated those roses. She'd said they were too plain, but I insisted. They weren't for her. They were for Noah. She didn't deserve to be part of this moment anyway. Then, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was from Claire. "Sorry I couldn't make it. Important business meeting. I'll make it up to you." Make it up to me? Make up for skipping her son's funeral? Make up for sipping cocktails while I laid Noah to rest? Rage flooded through me, hot and consuming. It burned away the grief, if only for a moment, and left me with one single thought. She had no idea what was coming. I wouldn't crumble like she expected. I wouldn't be the grieving widower she could manipulate. Claire may have abandoned us when Noah needed her most, but I would make sure her betrayal didn't go unanswered. That promise solidified as I stood to deliver the eulogy. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of neighbors, co-workers, and family friends, and forced myself to speak. Every word was for Noah. Every story about his joy and strength was a vow to protect his legacy, to ensure Claire's actions wouldn't taint his memory. I didn't let my voice crack. I didn't shed a tear. I saved those for later when I was alone. Today wasn't about my pain or Claire's betrayal. Today was about Noah. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Claire thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. So very wrong. The funeral reception was a charade. People offered their condolences with pitying eyes and rehearsed lines, shuffling through my parents' living room as though it were some kind of performance. Plates of untouched cookies and casseroles cluttered every surface. The air buzzed with whispers, the kind that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Everyone knew Claire wasn't there, and their silence said more than their words ever could. I moved through the room like a ghost, smiling stiffly at the neighbors, nodding absently at distant relatives. The sympathy felt like an insult, not because it wasn't deserved, but because I didn't want their pity. I wanted their honesty. I wanted someone to grab my arm and admit they'd seen the photo too, that they knew what she was doing, that they saw what she had become. But no one did. Claire's parents, Diana and Howard, hovered near the kitchen, their presence as unwelcome as their judgmental glances. They'd barely spoken to me all day, but I could feel their unspoken accusations. To them, I'd always been the problem. I wasn't attentive enough, not devoted enough. Claire was their golden child, and nothing she did could tarnish that image. Diana finally approached me as I stood by the mantel, staring at a framed photo of Noah. It was one of my favorites, his gap-toothed grin as he held up the results of one of his science experiments. The petals of a white rose were dyed a brilliant shade of blue, his hands streaked with food coloring. He'd been so proud that day. I clenched the frame tightly, the glass cool against my palms. "Jacob," Diana said, her voice laced with a sweetness that didn't match her sharp eyes, "you've been so strong today. It's a shame Claire couldn't be here, but she's grieving in her own way. You know how difficult this has been for her." Difficult for her? My grip on the frame tightened as I turned to face her. She looked at me with feigned concern, the kind that barely masked the criticism underneath. Her words felt like a slap, each syllable digging deeper into my growing rage. "I'm sure it has," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "Though I imagine Hawaii is a nice distraction from all the difficulty." Diana's expression faltered, just for a moment. She quickly recovered, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Jacob, grief makes people act out of character. Claire needed some space to process everything. You should try to be more understanding." Understanding? My jaw clenched as I fought to keep my composure. She didn't know, did she? Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. I wanted to shout at her, to show her the picture on my phone and force her to acknowledge the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I turned away, setting the photo of Noah back on the mantel with trembling hands. My mother appeared at my side then, her presence grounding me in a way that nothing else could. "Diana," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the tension, "I think you've said enough." Diana bristled, but she didn't argue. She retreated to the kitchen, leaving my mother and me in a heavy silence. "Don't let her get to you," Mom said quietly, her hand resting on my arm. "She's just trying to deflect. She knows what Claire has done." That admission hit me like a punch to the gut. "You think she knows?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's her mother," Mom said simply. "Of course she knows." Her words confirmed what I'd been dreading. This wasn't just Claire's betrayal, it was a family affair. Diana and Howard had likely known all along, and had chosen to protect Claire instead of holding her accountable. The thought made my blood boil. As the reception dragged on, I retreated to my father's study, desperate for a moment of quiet. I sank into his worn leather chair, the exhaustion of the day settling over me like a weight I couldn't shake. My mind raced with fragments of memories, each one laced with questions I couldn't yet answer. The business trips, the late-night phone calls, the way Claire had started pulling away, not just from me but from Noah. It had been subtle at first, a missed doctor's appointment here, a forgotten bedtime story there. But over time, it became clear that she wasn't fully present. I'd attributed it to the stress of Noah's illness, never suspecting there was something more sinister at play. I pulled out my phone, the photo of Claire and her lover glaring back at me from the screen. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. This wasn't just evidence of her infidelity, it was a reminder of what I was up against. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't let her get away with this. Not after abandoning me. Not after abandoning Noah. Claire thought she could escape the consequences of her actions, but she was wrong. As I sat in the dim light of the study, my anger solidified into resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. For Noah, for me, for everything we'd lost because of her selfishness. I would make her regret ever thinking she could betray me and walk away unscathed. The days after the funeral were a blur of condolences, casseroles, and sleepless nights. People came and went, offering words that felt more rehearsed than genuine. He's in a better place now. He's not suffering anymore. Their well-meaning attempts to comfort me only left me more hollow. What better place could there be than in my arms, laughing over cartoons, or insisting on pancakes for dinner? Grief clung to me like a second skin, but beneath it, anger churned like a storm waiting to break. The photo of Claire in Hawaii wouldn't leave my mind, haunting me every time I closed my eyes. She wasn't just absent at Noah's funeral, she was celebrating her freedom, as though our son's death had been her ticket to paradise. I busied myself with sorting through Noah's room, hoping the distraction would dull the edges of my pain. His favorite stuffed penguin sat on his bed, worn and slightly lopsided from years of cuddling. I picked it up, the familiar weight stirring a fresh wave of tears. He'd carried it everywhere, even to the hospital. As I placed the penguin on his pillow, something on Claire's side of the room caught my eye. A stack of papers on her desk, carelessly left in plain sight. It wasn't like Claire to leave anything disorganized. Her life was a series of meticulous lists and color-coded schedules. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, drew me closer. The top sheet stopped me cold. It was a life insurance policy. Noah's name was printed in bold letters at the top, and Claire's was listed as the sole beneficiary. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing more than the last. The policy was worth $1 million, taken out just 6 months after Noah's diagnosis. I'd never been consulted, never even seen these papers before. What hit me hardest, though, was the amendment. Weeks before Noah died, Claire had removed me as a beneficiary. Her signature stared back at me, a smug reminder of the decision she made without me. My hands shook as I rifled through the stack, finding receipts for loans she'd taken out against the policy. She had used the money, and for what? Plane tickets? Cocktails by the pool? Her lover's expensive taste? I sank into the chair, staring at the mess of papers. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Claire had stolen from our family, from Noah, to fund her escape. The realization hit me like a freight train. Noah's death wasn't just the end of my son's life. It was the moment Claire decided to bury our marriage alongside him. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. The number was unlisted, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something told me to answer. Hello? My voice was rough, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I need to talk to you, a woman's voice said. It was unfamiliar, hesitant, yet filled with urgency. It's about Claire. I gripped the phone tighter. Who is this? My name's Mia. She hesitated, as though weighing her next words. I know what she's been doing. I know about Hawaii. And I know you're not going to like what I have to tell you. My chest tightened. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, she admitted. But you should hear me out. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main. Now. The call disconnected, leaving me staring at the phone. Mia. The name didn't ring a bell, but the urgency in her voice was impossible to ignore. Part of me hesitated. What if this was a mistake? What if she was some crank with too much time on her hands? But another part, the part that couldn't stop replaying that photo of Claire in Hawaii, urged me to go. I needed answers, and whoever this Mia was, she seemed to have them. I grabbed the papers, stuffing them into a folder. If Mia had information, I'd be ready to confront her with evidence of my own. The anger I'd been suppressing since the funeral simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over. As I left the house, I glanced back at Noah's room. The penguin sat on his bed, a silent witness to everything falling apart. I promised him, silently, that I'd make this right. Whatever Mia had to say, whatever truth she carried, I was ready for it. Or at least, I thought I was. What I didn't realize then was that this meeting wouldn't just confirm my suspicions. It would open a door to something far worse. Something I couldn't have imagined, even in my darkest moments. The coffee shop on Main was the kind of place Claire used to hate. Plain, unassuming, without the flair she always demanded in her life. As I walked in, the smell of burnt coffee beans and cheap pastries hit me. A single glance was enough to spot her. She sat at the corner table by the window, a woman with dark auburn hair pulled into a neat ponytail, her posture rigid. She wasn't what I expected. Mia. She didn't look up as I approached, instead stirring her coffee in slow, deliberate circles. Her phone sat face down on the table, a small notebook beside it. I slid into the chair across from her, dropping my folder onto the table with a dull thud. She finally looked at me, her green eyes sharp and assessing. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice low but steady. "You have 5 minutes to explain why I'm here," I said, leaning back, arms crossed. She raised an eyebrow, unfazed by my tone. "Fair enough. I'll get straight to the point. Your wife, Claire, has been seeing my ex-boyfriend for over a year." The words were a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. "I already know that," I said flatly, though the bitterness in my voice betrayed me. "Oh, you know?" She tilted her head, her tone mocking. "Do you know about the money? Or how they're planning to use it to start their little dream life together in Maui?" I froze. "What money?" Mia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "The life insurance policy. The $1 million payout your wife secured after she had your son's name removed from the documents. She promised half of it to Brandon, my ex, so they could buy a beachfront property together." My stomach twisted. I wanted to accuse her of lying, to shove my chair back and leave, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed, my fingers digging into the edge of the table. "And how exactly do you know all this?" She smirked, a humorless expression. "Brandon isn't exactly discreet. He's been bragging about it for weeks. At first, I didn't believe him. Claire always struck me as too polished for a guy like him. But then he started showing me proof." Mia reached for her phone, scrolling with quick precision before sliding it across the table. Text messages filled the screen. Messages from Claire to Brandon. "Claire, the payout came through. It's more than enough. We'll be out of here by the end of the month. Brandon, Maui's waiting, babe. Just don't let him suspect anything. Claire, he's too broken to see straight. It's already done." My chest tightened, my breath shallow as I read each line. The Claire in those messages was someone I didn't recognize. Cold, calculating, detached. "I thought he was exaggerating," Mia continued, "but then I found more. Bank transfers, flight itineraries, even a picture of the house they're planning to buy. She's been funneling the money into an account with both their names on it." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she's playing both of us," Mia said bluntly. "She promised Brandon a fresh start, but I've seen the way she operates. The moment she doesn't need him anymore, she'll drop him, just like she's dropping you. And me? I'm already collateral damage. I've got nothing left to lose." Her words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. I didn't trust her, not completely, but I couldn't ignore the evidence she was laying out in front of me. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice low. Mia leaned back, crossing her arms. "Revenge. Justice. Call it whatever you want. Brandon doesn't get to walk away scot-free, and Claire sure as hell doesn't either. You want to bring them down? I can help you, but we have to act fast." I studied her, searching for any sign of deception. She met my gaze head-on, unflinching. I didn't trust her motivations. There was too much anger behind her words, too much venom. But I knew one thing for certain. Claire had lied to me, stolen from me, betrayed me in ways I hadn't even begun to comprehend. "I'm in," I said finally, my voice like steel. Mia nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Good. Because this is just the beginning." She reached into her bag, pulling out a thick envelope and sliding it across the table. "Everything you need to know is in here. Names, dates, bank accounts. It's all connected. We just have to find the right thread to pull." I picked up the envelope, the weight of it matching the heaviness in my chest. As I stood to leave, Mia called after me. "Jacob," she said, her tone softer now. I paused, glancing back at her. I'm sorry about your son. For what it's worth, I think Claire's the one who's broken, not you. Her words lingered as I walked out of the coffee shop and into the cold night air. My mind raced with the possibilities, the next steps, the ways I could make Claire and Brandon pay for what they'd done. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what little dignity I had left, about protecting Noah's memory from the people who thought they could profit from his death. They had no idea who they were up against. I spent the night poring over the envelope Mia had given me. It was a maze of text messages, bank statements, and photos, each one a punch to the gut. Every page confirmed what I already feared. Claire wasn't just a selfish woman running off with her lover. She was a schemer, a strategist, and her betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. The money trail was damning. Deposits and transfers into an account I didn't recognize, all under Claire's name, linked directly to Brandon. But what stopped me cold was the evidence of collaboration. Her parents, Diana and Howard, were involved. Their names popped up in emails and on checks tied to business ventures that didn't exist. I should have seen it earlier, the way Diana and Howard always coddled Claire, treating her like she could do no wrong. They'd always blamed me for our marital problems, subtly undermining me with snide remarks disguised as advice. But now, I realized they hadn't just been enabling her. They'd been actively helping her. The tipping point came when I found an email exchange between Diana and Claire. Diana, Jacob won't suspect a thing. He's too focused on Noah. Just make sure the papers are signed before he catches on. Claire, he won't notice. He's too broken to care. And once it's done, it's done. The papers. What papers? My heart raced as I flipped through more documents, searching for answers. Then I found it. A property transfer agreement for our family home. The place where I grew up, where Noah spent his final days, was being sold. Claire had forged my signature, making it look like I'd agreed to the sale. They were planning to take everything. The insurance payout, the house, even our joint savings. I could almost hear Diana's sharp, dismissive voice in my head. It's what's best for Claire. The anger I'd been holding back exploded, but I had no outlet. I paced the living room, fists clenched, trying to keep my breathing steady. They thought they could manipulate me, use my grief to blind me. They thought they could steal everything I had left and walk away unscathed. But they were wrong. By morning, my plan was beginning to take shape. I needed more proof, more leverage, and I knew exactly where to start. My mother, always my anchor, had been hinting at things for days, things she'd seen and suspected. If anyone could help me connect the dots, it was her. I found her in the kitchen, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her sharp eyes immediately narrowing. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the cup down. "They're trying to sell the house," I said bluntly. "Claire and her parents. They forged my signature." Her face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I knew it," she muttered. "You knew?" I asked, leaning forward. "I suspected," she admitted. "Diana's been sniffing around for months, asking questions about the property. She even tried to get your father to sign something when he was confused, but I intercepted it. That hit me like a blow to the chest. My father, with his slipping memory, was another pawn in their game. They had no shame, no limits to how far they'd go. She said it was just a precaution. My mother continued, her voice trembling with anger. But I didn't trust her. I kept the papers. They're in the study. She didn't need to say more. I hurried to the study, rifling through the drawers until I found the documents. There it was, a legal form authorizing the sale of the house, with my father's signature scrawled at the bottom. A forgery. They thought he wouldn't remember, my mother said, standing behind me now. They thought I wouldn't notice. But I've been watching them, Jacob. Diana's always been manipulative. But this is something else. I sat down, the weight of everything crashing over me. They're not just after the money, I said quietly. They're after everything. The house, the savings. Everything Noah and I loved. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. Then don't let them win. Fight back. Her words lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Noah's legacy, about protecting what little I had left of him. Claire and her family thought they could outsmart me, But they underestimated one thing: my resolve. They wanted to play games? Fine. But I wasn't going to sit back and let them take everything. If they thought I was broken, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I spent the rest of the day gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Bank records, emails, documents from Mia's envelope. It all started forming a bigger picture. Claire and her parents had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. They were careful, calculating, but they'd made mistakes, and I was going to exploit every single one of them. When night fell, I sat in Noah's room, holding his stuffed penguin. "I'll fix this," I whispered into the darkness. "I promise you, Noah, I won't let them take what's ours." The storm inside me had calmed, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. Claire and her family thought they could destroy me, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just grieving, I was preparing. Claire thought she was untouchable. Her meticulous lies, the forged documents, the money funneled into secret accounts. She believed she had covered every angle. But what she didn't count on was me finding the cracks. That's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you an advantage. And after seeing how far she and her parents were willing to go, I realized I had to strike first. The house was the key. It wasn't just a property. It was a piece of my family's soul. My father built it with his own hands, one nail and board at a time. It was where I grew up, where Noah learned to walk, and where we sat for countless nights, holding him through the worst of his illness. It was sacred. And Claire? She wanted to sell it to bankroll her escape. That morning, I called Marcus, an old friend who had transitioned from our high school debate team to a sharp legal career. He owed me a favor, and now was the time to cash in. "Jacob," Marcus said after hearing me out, his tone serious, "this is messy. If they forged your signature, we can fight the sale. But we need more than your word. We need proof, witnesses, documents, anything to show a pattern of deceit." "I've got plenty," I replied, thinking of the stack of evidence Mia had handed over and the forged documents my mother had intercepted. "But I need to know how we stop this before it goes any further." Marcus sighed on the other end of the line. "We need to move quickly. If they finalize the sale before we act, undoing it will be a nightmare. Let me pull some strings and dig into the legal filings. In the meantime, gather everything you can. Don't leave anything to chance." I thanked him and hung up, my mind already racing. Marcus was right. The clock was ticking. Claire and her parents weren't wasting time, and neither could I. I started by laying out everything Mia had given me, pinning it to the corkboard in my father's study like a detective piecing together a case. Bank transfers, emails, photos. It all painted a damning picture. But I needed more. My mother was my first ally. She kept a watchful eye on Diana's manipulations for months and was all too eager to help. "Your father might not remember everything clearly," she said, "but I do." Diana and Howard tried to pressure him into signing those papers more than once. I kept notes every time they showed up here unannounced. She handed me a small notebook, the pages filled with dates and detailed accounts of their visits. It was more evidence, another layer to add to the case I was building. Next, I reached out to Mia. As much as I hated relying on her, she had insight into Claire's plans that I couldn't ignore. "They're meeting with the realtor tomorrow to finalize the sale," she said over the phone. "If you're going to stop them, you'll need to be there." "How do you know this?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. "Because Claire doesn't think I'm a threat," Mia replied. "She keeps me in the loop, thinking I'll just go along with it. But she doesn't realize I'm one step ahead of her now." Her bitterness was palpable, and while I didn't trust her completely, I knew she was right about one thing. Claire underestimated us both. With the pieces falling into place, I spent the rest of the day preparing. I copied every document, recorded every detail, and made sure I had backups. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. By the time night fell, the study was a battlefield of papers and plans. My mother walked in, a cup of tea in hand, and set it down beside me. "You've got that look in your eye," she said. "What look?" I asked, glancing up from the corkboard. "The same look your father used to get when someone tried to cheat him out of a deal," she said with a faint smile. "Don't let them take this from us, Jacob. Don't let them take Noah's home." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about me or even the house. It was about protecting what Noah loved, what he left behind. The rage I'd felt at Claire's betrayal had evolved into something sharper, more focused. They won't, I promised. The next morning, I dressed like a man going to war. Suit pressed, tie knotted, folder in hand. Marcus had already filed a motion to halt the sale, but I knew I needed to show up and confront them head-on. As I stepped out the door, my mother handed me something small, a worn, stuffed penguin. "Take it with you," she said softly. "For luck." I slipped it into my briefcase, the familiar weight grounding me. It wasn't just a toy. It was a reminder of Noah's laughter, his resilience, his love for the life Claire had so easily abandoned. When I arrived at the realtor's office, I saw Claire's car parked out front. Inside, she and Diana were already seated at the table, their polished smiles masking the lies they'd been spinning for months. "Jacob," Claire said, feigning surprise as I entered. "What are you doing here?" I set the folder down on the table, opening it to reveal the evidence of their fraud. "Stopping you," I said coldly. The look on her face was priceless. But this wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Claire's face went pale the moment I opened the folder. She wasn't prepared for this. None of them were. Diana sat beside her, her usual smug demeanor faltering as her eyes darted to the documents spread across the table. The realtor, caught in the crossfire of a battle he hadn't signed up for, looked deeply uncomfortable. "What is this?" Claire asked, her voice laced with faux confusion, though the quiver in it betrayed her nerves. "You tell me," I replied, leaning forward, "because it looks like a stack of evidence proving that you and your mother have been forging documents, siphoning money, and trying to sell this house behind my back." Diana's lips thinned. "Jacob, there's no need for dramatics. This is a simple real estate matter." "A simple real estate matter?" I shot back, my voice rising. "This is my home, Diana. My family's home. And you tried to take it away by forging my signature. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you think I was too broken to fight back?" Claire shifted uncomfortably, her polished confidence unraveling. "Jacob, please. We've been under a lot of stress. We were just trying to handle things while you were grieving." I slammed my hand on the table, startling everyone. "Don't you dare use Noah's death to justify this. While I was burying my son, you were plotting to steal everything we built together. And for what? To run off with Brandon and live your little fantasy life in Hawaii?" Her eyes widened. I'd hit a nerve. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I cut her off. "I understand that you've been lying to me for months. I understand that you've been funneling money into secret accounts. And I understand that you're willing to destroy what little I have left, all for some cheap thrill." Diana tried to interject, but I wasn't finished. "And you," I said, turning to her, "have been complicit in all of this, manipulating my father, forging signatures, covering for Claire while she betrayed our family. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" For the first time, Diana looked rattled. "Jacob, you're being unreasonable. We were only trying to protect Claire's interests. You've been unstable since Noah's death." "Unstable?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean grieving, mourning the son I loved, more than anything while Claire was busy planning her escape. If anyone's unstable, it's her, and you, for enabling her." The realtor cleared his throat, clearly regretting his decision to show up for work that day. "I think I should step out?" "No," I said sharply, turning to him. "You stay. You're about to see just how illegal this so-called real estate matter really is." I pulled out my phone and played the recording Mia had given me, a conversation between Claire and Brandon discussing their plans for the insurance money. "Claire, the payout's in the account. Once the house sells, we'll have enough for the down payment on the Maui place." "Brandon, what about Jacob?" "Claire, he's too distracted to notice. He'll never see it coming." The room fell silent. Claire's face turned an ashen shade of white, and Diana's composure shattered. "You recorded me?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But someone who knows the kind of person you are did. And she was more than happy to help me expose you." Claire's eyes darted to the door, as if she were considering bolting. "You can't prove anything," she said weakly. Oh, but I can. I slid more documents across the table, bank statements, emails, and evidence of forged signatures. Every transaction, every forged document, every lie. It's all here. And Marcus has already filed a motion to halt the sale. This house isn't going anywhere. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Claire looked at Diana, but for once, her mother had no comforting words to offer. You thought I'd just roll over and let you win, I said, my voice low but steady. But you underestimated me. You always have. This ends now. Diana opened her mouth to speak, but the door swung open before she could say anything. Marcus walked in, holding a stack of legal papers. Sorry I'm late, he said, his tone casual. I was just at the courthouse filing an injunction to freeze all property transactions tied to this house. He set the papers down on the table and turned to the realtor. You might want to walk away from this deal. It's going to get messy. The realtor didn't hesitate. I think that's my cue to leave, he muttered, grabbing his briefcase and practically running out the door. With him gone, I turned back to Claire and Diana. You have two options, I said. You can walk away now, leave this house, and give up on whatever scheme you had planned. Or you can fight me, and I'll make sure you both end up in court, and on the front page of every newspaper in town. Claire stared at me, her mask of control completely gone. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Diana, however, wasn't ready to surrender. You're bluffing, she spat. I met her gaze head-on. Try me. Claire grabbed Diana's arm. Mom, stop. He's not bluffing. Diana hesitated, but the look in Claire's eyes convinced her. Without another word, they stood and walked out, their once confident strides now shaky and uncertain. As the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Marcus clapped me on the back. You did good, he said, but I wasn't celebrating yet. This was just one battle. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The fallout began the moment Claire and Diana walked out of the realtor's office. They left behind the smugness they had carried for so long, their carefully curated facade shattered. But for me, that moment was just the beginning. The confrontation had stopped the sale of the house, but the damage they'd tried to inflict was far more extensive than I'd realized. Marcus wasted no time filing motions to freeze all joint assets and accounts. They're not just after the house, Jacob, he told me as we sat in his office later that day. They've been playing a long game, trying to drain everything you own. If we don't act fast, they could still slip through the cracks. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. What's our next move? We expose them, he said simply. All of them. Claire, Diana, Howard, everyone who had a hand in this. We hit them with fraud charges, property theft, and anything else we can prove. It was a daunting prospect, but I was ready. This wasn't just about getting justice for me anymore. It was about protecting Noah's memory and ensuring that Claire and her family faced the consequences of their actions. The first step was gathering more evidence. Marcus and I pored over every document, email, and transaction we could find, building a case that left no room for doubt. Mia proved to be an invaluable ally, providing even more damning information about Claire's secret accounts and her relationship with Brandon. You don't realize how much she bragged to him, Mia said during one of our meetings. She thought he was her partner in crime, but Brandon was careless. He left a trail everywhere he went. The evidence painted a grim picture of Claire's betrayal. She hadn't just siphoned money from the life insurance policy. She had also funneled funds from our joint savings, creating fake expenses to cover her tracks. Diana and Howard had been complicit every step of the way, using their influence to hide her actions and manipulate legal documents. With Marcus leading the charge, we filed a civil suit against Claire and her parents. The legal process was grueling, each step a reminder of just how much they had tried to take from me. But as the weeks went by, the tide began to turn. Claire's lover, Brandon, became the first crack in their armor. Faced with mounting pressure, he turned on her, providing testimony that corroborated everything Mia and I had uncovered. His statements confirmed Claire's intentions to steal the insurance payout and use it to start a new life in Hawaii. Diana and Howard weren't as quick to fold. They tried to spin the narrative, painting themselves as victims who had only been trying to protect Claire during a difficult time. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. Emails, bank records, and forged documents all pointed to their active involvement in the scheme. The final blow came when Marcus uncovered an even deeper layer of deception. Claire and Diana had attempted to manipulate my father into signing over not just the house, but other family assets as well. Marcus found proof that they had targeted him during moments of confusion caused by his dementia, hoping to exploit his condition for their gain. "That's not just fraud," Marcus said when he showed me the documents. "That's elder abuse. And the courts won't take that lightly." When the charges were filed, the weight of their crimes finally caught up with them. Claire, Diana, and Howard faced a litany of legal consequences, from fraud to property theft to conspiracy. The public exposure was brutal. Their once respected reputations in our small town reduced to nothing but gossip and disgrace. Claire, of course, tried to play the victim. "I didn't know what I was doing," she claimed during a deposition. "I was grieving. I made mistakes." But her tears didn't fool anyone. Not the lawyers, not the judge, and certainly not me. She had made her choices, and now she was paying for them. In the end, the courts ruled in my favor. The house was officially mine again, along with the remaining assets Claire hadn't managed to siphon away. The life insurance payout, which she had planned to use for her new life, was frozen and redirected to its original purpose, supporting pediatric cancer patients in Noah's name. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. Every step of the way, I had fought to protect what mattered most: my son's memory and the legacy he left behind. But even with the legal battle won, the scars of their betrayal remained. Claire's actions had fractured something deep within me, something that couldn't be easily repaired. She had shown me the depths of her selfishness, and while I had triumphed over her schemes, it came at a cost. As for Diana and Howard, they retreated from the public eye, their reputations in ruins. They had spent years building their influence, only to see it crumble in the face of their greed. I couldn't bring Noah back, but I could ensure that Claire and her family would never hurt anyone else the way they had hurt me. The fallout was complete. The house was safe, the money redirected to a cause that mattered, and the people who had tried to destroy me were facing the consequences of their actions. But the fight wasn't over yet, not for me. Because while the legal battle was behind me, the journey toward healing had just begun. The house was quiet now, a kind of quiet that settled deep in my chest. For months, it had been filled with the chaos of lawyers, documents, and the weight of betrayal. But now, with the legal battle over and Claire and her family facing the consequences of their actions, there was a sense of stillness, a bittersweet calm that came with knowing the storm had passed, even if the damage remained. Noah's room was just as he had left it. His favorite stuffed penguin sat on the bed. Its worn seams a testament to how much he had loved it. The colorful drawings he'd taped to the walls were still there, and for a moment, I could almost hear his laughter. I sat on the edge of his bed, holding the penguin, letting the memories wash over me. The court's decision had ensured the house would stay in the family. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about Noah's legacy, protecting everything he had loved and making sure his memory meant something more than just heartache. That's why I took the life insurance payout, every penny Claire had tried to steal, and set up the Noah Thompson Foundation. The foundation would fund pediatric cancer research and support families going through what we had endured. It felt right, like something Noah would have wanted. He had always been so full of compassion, even when he was the one in pain. The first grant went to the pediatric cancer ward where he had spent so much time. I visited the hospital to meet the families it would help, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. Noah's name would live on, not just in my heart, but in the lives of those he would continue to touch. But moving forward didn't mean forgetting. On a crisp fall morning, I made my way to the cemetery. The air was cool, the leaves crunching under my feet as I approached Noah's grave. His headstone was simple, just the way he would have liked it, with a small engraving of a penguin in the corner. I knelt down, brushing away a few stray leaves, and placed the stuffed penguin at the base of the stone. "You'd be proud, buddy," I whispered. "The house is safe, the foundation's up and running, and your memory is helping so many people. I promised you I'd fix this, and I did." The wind rustled the trees, and for a moment, it felt like Noah was there, his spirit woven into the world around me. Your grandma outsmarted them all, I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. She was brilliant, just like you always said. As I stood, my father approached, his steps slow but steady. His memory wasn't what it used to be, but today, his eyes were clear. He's at peace now, he said quietly, his voice steady. I hope so, I replied, my throat tightening. He touched the penguin, his hand lingering on its soft fabric. Noah told me something once, not long before he passed, he said. He said, don't worry about Dad. He's stronger than everyone thinks. I swallowed hard, tears blurring my vision. He said that? My father nodded, a faint smile on his lips. He was right, you know. We stood there in silence, the weight of grief and love mingling in the cool air. A monarch butterfly landed on the headstone, its delicate wings catching the sunlight like stained glass. My father reached for it, but I gently caught his hand. Let it be, I said softly. The butterfly took flight, spiraling upward, free and unburdened. I watched it until it disappeared, understanding for the first time that true strength wasn't in revenge or victory. It was in letting go. I slipped my arm around my father's shoulders, guiding him back toward the car. Pancakes? I asked, a smile creeping into my voice. His face lit up, a rare moment of clarity shining through. Pancakes. Noah always loved pancakes. Yes, he did, I said, my heart full of bittersweet warmth. As we walked away, I glanced back at the penguin standing guard at the headstone. It wasn't just a symbol of Noah. It was a reminder of everything we had fought for. The butterfly had shown me the way forward. It wasn't about forgetting the pain, but about honoring the love that came with it. And as I drove home with my father, the weight of the past finally began to lift. Noah was gone, but his spirit remained, guiding me toward a life where love and resilience could coexist with loss. It wasn't triumph, it was survival. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. My wife introduced me to her uncle, the son of a bank president. He and his parents made fun of me for being a high school graduate. When I said I would close my account, they laughed. But when I closed my $7 billion account, look, I'm going to level with you right off the bat. I never gave two craps about playing those ridiculous status games that seem to consume half the people in this country. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? The whole, my car's bigger than yours, my job title sounds fancier, I went to Harvard so I'm automatically smarter, bullshit that makes cocktail parties feel like pissing contests. At 34, I had what most people would kill for, a solid marriage to Claire, a woman who could make me laugh until my sides hurt, and who looked absolutely stunning in everything from sweatpants to evening gowns. I was also the senior consultant for a logistics firm that I'd literally built from the ground up, starting with nothing but a beat-up laptop and more determination than sense. But here's the kicker, and this is where things get interesting. Most people had absolutely no clue about the real scope of what I'd accomplished. See, my background wasn't exactly what you'd call impressive on paper. I didn't graduate from some fancy Ivy League school with a degree in business administration and a minor in how to be pretentious. Hell, I didn't graduate from any college at all. After high school, while my classmates were busy taking out massive student loans to study subjects they'd never use in the real world, I jumped straight into the workforce at 18. Call me crazy, but I figured learning by doing beat learning by theory any day of the week. But here's the thing that nobody seemed to understand. I had this weird gift for three things that actually matter in business. Numbers, systems, and people. Numbers don't lie to you like people sometimes do. Systems either work or they don't. There's no middle ground to hide mediocrity in. And people? Well, once you figure out what makes them tick, you can build something incredible together. Over the years, I'd taken that knack and turned it into something most people only dream about, through smart investments. And I'm talking the kind of calculated risks that would make a Vegas dealer nervous. I'd build up what most folks would consider a small fortune. But that wasn't even the half of it. Eventually, I became the silent owner of multiple international ventures. We're talking businesses spanning 3 continents, dealing in everything from shipping logistics to tech startups to real estate developments that were reshaping city skylines. The funny part? I still lived like a regular guy. Give me a pair of old jeans and a comfortable t-shirt over some stuffy three-piece suit any day. I drove a reliable car that got me from point A to point B without breaking down, not some flashy sports car that screamed, "Look at me. I'm compensating for something." My house was nice, but not ostentatious. Comfortable furniture, a good kitchen where Claire could work her culinary magic, and a home office where I could run my empire in peace. Most people, and I'm talking even my own family here, looked at me and saw just another average working stiff. They'd see me at family barbecues wearing the same casual clothes I'd had for years, talking about normal stuff like sports and weather, and they'd mentally file me away as Claire's husband who works in logistics. Which, technically speaking, was true. I just happened to own the logistics companies too. Even Claire, bless her heart, knew I had money. She wasn't stupid, and she could see that we lived comfortably, that I never stressed about bills, and that I could afford nice things when we wanted them. But she didn't know the full picture. She knew I was successful, but she didn't know I was, by a small country, successful. And honestly, I thought that was perfectly fine. There's something to be said for flying under the radar. When people don't know you're wealthy, they treat you like a human being instead of like a walking ATM or networking opportunity. Conversations are genuine instead of calculated. People invite you to things because they actually like your company, not because they want something from you. It was a simple life, and I was content with it. Looking back now, with all the hindsight that comes from watching your world implode in spectacular fashion, I realize I was naive to think I could keep that balance forever. The thing about money, especially the kind of serious money I'd accumulated, is that it has a way of making itself known eventually. It's like trying to hide an elephant in your living room by throwing a bedsheet over it. Eventually, someone's going to notice the giant elephant-shaped lump taking up half the space. But at the time, sitting in my comfortable little bubble of anonymity, I thought I had it all figured out. I was successful without the stress of everyone knowing about it. I was wealthy without the target on my back that usually comes with wealth. I had a wife who loved me for who I was, not what I could buy her. Life was good, simple, and uncomplicated. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have realized that Claire's family, with their old money roots and social climbing tendencies, would eventually want to pull me into their world of appearances and status games. And I definitely should have seen it coming when Claire started talking about introducing me to her Uncle Leonard, the golden boy of the family banking dynasty. But hey, hindsight's 20/20, right? At the time, I was just a guy who'd worked hard, gotten lucky, and wanted to enjoy the fruits of his labor in peace. Little did I know that peace was about to become a very expensive luxury. So there I was, Thursday evening, sitting at our kitchen table demolishing what had to be the best lasagna this side of Little Italy. Claire had this incredible talent for taking simple ingredients and turning them into something that would make Gordon Ramsay weep tears of joy. I'm talking about the kind of comfort food that makes you forget all your problems and wonder why anyone ever invented restaurants in the first place. I was just reaching for my second helping. Okay, fine. It was my third. Don't judge me. When Claire dropped the bomb that would eventually blow up my nice, quiet life into a million pieces. "Oh, by the way," she said, twirling her fork through her pasta like she was about to comment on the weather, "my Uncle Leonard wants to meet you." She said it so casually, you'd think she was mentioning that the mailman had delivered a package or that we were running low on milk. I paused mid-bite, a forkful of cheesy goodness hovering somewhere between the plate and my mouth. Leonard? The banking guy. I knew exactly who she was talking about, of course. Leonard Morrison, the crown prince of the Morrison banking empire, son of Preston Morrison, who ran Summit Bank like it was his personal piggy bank. Claire had mentioned him before in passing. Usually when she was talking about family gatherings, I'd conveniently found excuses to miss. "That's the one," Claire nodded, taking a sip of the wine I'd grabbed from our collection. Not gonna lie, I had pretty decent taste in wine for a guy who supposedly just worked in logistics. He's very well connected, you know. His father runs Summit Bank, and Leonard's being groomed to take over eventually. This could be really good for you, honey. Now, here's where I should probably mention something important about my relationship with Claire's family. They came from what people like to call old money. The kind of wealth that's been passed down through generations like a family heirloom, complete with all the pretentious attitudes and social expectations that come with it. They had trust funds, country club memberships, and the kind of family trees that genealogists get excited about. Meanwhile, I came from the kind of family where a fancy dinner meant we splurged on name-brand ketchup instead of the store brand. Good for me how exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about where this was heading. In my experience, when someone with old money wants to help someone without it, there's usually a catch somewhere in the fine print. Claire leaned forward with that enthusiastic expression she got when she thought she'd solved all my problems. Well, you know, networking. Leonard knows everyone in the financial world. He could introduce you to potential clients, maybe help you expand your consulting business. You're always talking about growing the company, right? The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Here was my wife, bless her heart, thinking I needed help expanding a business empire that already spanned multiple continents. It was like someone offering to teach Michael Jordan how to play basketball or suggesting that Gordon Ramsay might benefit from a cooking class at the local community center. But how could I explain that without revealing the full extent of what I'd built? Claire knew I was successful. She could see that we lived comfortably, that I never stressed about money, that I could afford nice things when we wanted them. But she thought successful meant I made good money as a consultant, not that I could buy and sell most of the companies Leonard probably considered impressive. I don't really need connections, babe, I said carefully, trying to find the right balance between truth and discretion. The business is doing pretty well on its own. Claire waved her hand dismissively, like I was being modest for no reason. Oh, come on. Everyone can use good connections. Besides, Leonard's really curious about you. I've told him you're smart and hardworking, and he wants to meet the man who swept me off my feet. I had to bite back a laugh at that. If Leonard was anything like the typical banking heir I'd dealt with in my business ventures, he was probably curious about me the same way a cat is curious about a mouse, as something amusing to play with before moving on to more important matters. He's a bit blunt, Claire continued, using that tone people use when they're trying to warn you about someone without actually warning you. But don't take it personally. That's just how he is. Once you two start talking business, I'm sure he'll respect you. He respects success, and you're definitely successful. Again with the irony. If Leonard respected success, he was about to meet more of it than he could handle. But Claire didn't know that, and something told me this meeting was going to be a masterclass in assumptions and misconceptions. Besides, Claire added, warming to her subject, it'll be good for you to meet more people from my family. I know you've been avoiding some of the gatherings, but Leonard's different. He's accomplished something on his own merit, not just inherited everything. I almost choked on my wine at that one. From what I'd heard through Claire's family gossip network, Leonard's biggest accomplishment was being born with the right last name. Sure, he worked at the bank, but calling it his own merit was like saying a NASCAR driver built his own racetrack. When and where? I asked, figuring I might as well get this over with. Besides, there was a part of me, the part that had always enjoyed a good challenge, that was curious to see exactly how far up their own asses the Morrison family had their heads. This Saturday at Meridian. You know, that steakhouse downtown. Claire's face lit up like she'd just solved world hunger. Leonard's parents will be there too, Preston and Marjorie. It'll be perfect. Perfect. Right. Because nothing says perfect evening like dinner with people who judge your worth based on which university you didn't attend and which country club you don't belong to. Sounds great. I lied, already mentally preparing myself for what was sure to be an evening of barely concealed condescension and thinly veiled insults. Little did I know I was walking into what would become the most expensive dinner conversation in Summit Bank's 100-year history. Looking back now, I should have trusted my instincts and found an excuse to skip the whole thing. But sometimes life has a funny way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when where you need to be is about to become a complete shit show. Saturday evening rolled around faster than a tax bill in April, and there I was, standing in front of my closet trying to figure out what the hell to wear to meet the royal banking family. Claire had been buzzing around the house all day like a caffeinated hummingbird, giving me helpful suggestions like, make sure you look presentable, and try to make a good impression. Because apparently, she thought I regularly showed up to important dinners looking like I'd just crawled out of a dumpster behind a 7-Eleven. I settled on my usual go-to for occasions when I needed to look like I gave a damn, but didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Black shirt, dark blazer, and my most comfortable pair of dress pants. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed, look at me, I'm important. just clean and understated. In my world, if you had to advertise how successful you were through your clothes, you probably weren't as successful as you thought you were. The drive to Meridian was quiet except for Claire's nervous chatter about how excited she was for me to finally meet her uncle and his parents. She kept going on about how this was going to be so good for my career and how Leonard was really looking forward to talking business with me. I just nodded and made the appropriate sounds while mentally preparing myself for what I was pretty sure was going to be an exercise in patience. Meridian was exactly the kind of place you'd expect old money types to hang out. All dark wood paneling, dim lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that whispered, if you have to ask about the prices, you can't afford to eat here. The hostess, a blonde woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine about expensive things, greeted us with the kind of smile that was professionally warm but personally cold. "We're meeting the Morrison party," Claire told her, and I swear the hostess's smile became about 20% more genuine. Money recognizes money, even when it's just the smell of it lingering in the air. She led us through the restaurant to a corner table where 3 people were already seated, and let me tell you, they looked exactly like Central Casting had ordered them for a movie about entitled rich people. There was Preston Morrison, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair that had been styled to within an inch of its life, and the kind of tan that comes from spending winters in places where the average person's annual salary wouldn't cover a week's vacation. Next to him sat Marjorie, his wife, who had that ageless quality that comes from having unlimited access to the best plastic surgeon's money can buy. Her jewelry alone probably cost more than most people's cars, and she wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to check her bank balance before making a purchase. And then there was Leonard. Oh, Leonard. The golden boy himself, probably around my age, but carrying himself like he'd been born wearing a crown. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been told no about anything important in your entire life. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore it like armor against the common folk. They all stood up as we approached, and I could practically feel the temperature drop as their eyes took in my appearance. It was like watching 3 people simultaneously realize they'd been expecting filet mignon and had been served a cheeseburger instead. "Leonard, Mom, Dad," Claire said with obvious excitement. "This is my husband, the one I've been telling you about." I extended my hand to Preston first, because that seemed like the polite thing to do. His handshake was firm but brief, the kind that said, "I'm acknowledging your existence, but don't get too comfortable." Marjorie offered me a hand that felt like she was afraid I might contaminate her manicure, and Leonard's grip was the kind of aggressive squeeze that insecure men use to establish dominance. "Please, sit down," Preston said, gesturing to the chairs across from them like he was granting me an audience. We hadn't even ordered drinks yet, and I could already tell this was going to be a long evening. The waiter appeared almost instantly. Apparently, when you're a Morrison, service happens at light speed. After we'd ordered drinks, they went for expensive wine while I stuck with a beer, because I'm a simple man with simple tastes. The interrogation began. "So," Preston said, settling back in his chair with the air of a judge preparing to hear a case. "Claire tells us you work in consulting. That's interesting. What exactly do you consult about?" "Logistics, mostly," I replied, taking a sip of my beer. "Supply chain optimization, efficiency improvements, that sort of thing." Marjorie tilted her head like a confused bird. "Oh, like shipping?" The way she said shipping made it sound like I'd told her I made my living collecting garbage or cleaning sewers. There was this barely concealed distaste in her voice, like she couldn't quite believe her precious niece had married someone who dealt with such mundane, blue-collar concerns. "Among other things, yeah," I said, keeping my tone even. "It's actually more complex than most people realize. Global supply chains, international trade regulations, cross-border logistics coordination." "Fascinating," Leonard interrupted, though his tone suggested he found it about as fascinating as watching paint dry. "And where did you study this? What university?" And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. The academic credentials check that people like this always used as their first filter for whether someone was worth their time. "I didn't go to college," I said simply. "I went straight into business after high school." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. All three of them just stared at me like I'd announced I was actually an alien from Mars who'd come to Earth to study human mating rituals. Preston recovered first, clearing his throat with the kind of diplomatic cough that probably served him well in board meetings. Well, that's quite entrepreneurial of you. The way he said entrepreneurial made it clear he meant stupid, but was too polite to say it directly. Marjorie's eyebrows had climbed so high they were practically hiding in her hairline, and Leonard was looking at me like I was a fascinating specimen he'd found under a microscope. The look they exchanged between the three of them was the kind of silent communication that only comes from years of shared snobbery. It was the look that said, "Oh honey, we were expecting someone impressive, and instead we got this." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was when I knew this evening was going to be absolutely fucking epic. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare, except instead of being the observer, I was the target sitting in the middle of the battlefield with a bullseye painted on my forehead. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be slowly dissected by people who consider themselves your intellectual superiors, well, buckle up, Buttercup, because I'm about to give you a front row seat to the show. Marjorie was the first to reload her weapon after that nuclear silence. She gave me what I can only describe as the kind of smile you'd give a toddler who just proudly announced they'd eaten their own boogers. "Oh, so you're self-taught," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy usually reserved for terminal cancer patients. "That's so very brave of you." Brave. Like I'd climbed Mount Everest in flip-flops instead of choosing to skip 4 years of overpriced education to start making actual money. The way she said it made it clear that in her world, self-taught was just a polite way of saying too poor and stupid for real school. Leonard, not to be outdone by his mother in the art of subtle insults, let out this little chuckle that sounded like a hyena choking on its own smugness. He turned to his father with the kind of theatrical gesture that belonged on a soap opera. "Uncle Preston, can you even imagine trying to run a major business with only a high school diploma? I mean, that's really quite rare these days, isn't it?" The emphasis he put on rare made it clear he meant impossible, but was trying to sound diplomatic about it. It was like listening to someone say, "Bless your heart," while simultaneously planning your funeral. Preston, who was clearly the master of this particular family sport, nodded sagely like Leonard had just made some profound observation about the nature of human intelligence. Indeed, Leonard, in today's complex business environment, one really needs a solid educational foundation. Harvard Business School teaches principles that simply can't be learned anywhere else. Ah yes, Harvard Business School, the magical place where they apparently teach you how to lose $7 billion without breaking a sweat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Of course, Marjorie chimed in, apparently not content to let the men have all the fun. There's something quite refreshing about the old-fashioned approach. So authentic. She said authentic the way most people would say quaint or adorable, like I was a cute little folk art project she'd discovered at a rural craft fair. Claire, bless her oblivious heart, was sitting there sipping her wine like this was perfectly normal dinner conversation. Every now and then she'd nod along like they were discussing the weather instead of systematically dismantling her husband's credibility one backhanded compliment at a time. "You know," Leonard continued, warming to his subject like a stand-up comedian who'd found his rhythm, "I have so much respect for people who make it work without the advantages of proper education. It must be incredibly challenging to compete in sophisticated markets when you're, what's the phrase, flying by the seat of your pants?" Flying by the seat of my pants. Right. Because apparently turning a high school education into a multi-billion-dollar international business empire was just dumb luck and good timing. Like winning the lottery, except instead of buying one ticket, I'd somehow stumbled my way into owning the entire lottery system. "Oh, absolutely," Marjorie agreed enthusiastically. "It's so admirable when people make the best of their circumstances. I always tell my charity board that we shouldn't underestimate what people can accomplish even with limited opportunities." Limited opportunities. There it was, the real kicker. In their minds, I wasn't just uneducated. I was some kind of charity case who'd managed to scrape together a decent living despite my tragic lack of proper breeding and academic credentials. The waiter chose that moment to return for our dinner orders, and I swear he could sense the tension at the table. He kept glancing between us like he was watching a tennis match where one player was getting massacred but somehow kept getting back up for more punishment after we'd ordered. And of course they all went for the most expensive items on the menu, while making subtle comments about how I should try the business lunch special. It's quite reasonable. The conversation resumed with renewed vigor. You know what's really impressive though, Leonard said, leaning forward with fake enthusiasm, is that you've managed to keep Claire happy without being able to provide her with the lifestyle she grew up with. That takes real creativity. And there it was, the suggestion that I was some kind of financial burden on their precious princess. Never mind that Claire lived better with me than she ever had with her trust fund. Never mind that our house was nicer than anything she'd ever owned before. In their minds, if you didn't have the right pedigree, you couldn't possibly be providing adequately. Preston nodded approvingly at his son's observation. Yes, love conquers all, as they say. Claire's always been our little romantic, willing to overlook practical considerations for matters of the heart. Practical considerations, like the fact that I could buy and sell their entire social circle before lunch and still have enough left over to buy a small country for dessert. It's just so fortunate, Marjorie added with that same patronizing smile, that Claire has the family resources to fall back on if things get difficult. We always take care of our own, don't we, Preston? The implication was crystal clear. When this little experiment in marrying beneath her station inevitably failed, they'd be there to pick up the pieces and find Claire someone more suitable. But here's the thing about sitting there listening to people talk about you like you're some kind of financial deadbeat who got lucky. It gives you a lot of time to think. And what I was thinking, as I watched these three pompous assholes pat themselves on the back for their superior breeding and education, was how absolutely fucking hilarious this was going to be when the truth came out. They thought they were looking at a small-time consultant who'd married above his station. What they were actually looking at was someone who could end their family's banking dynasty with a phone call. But patience, I told myself. Let them have their fun. The night was still young, and the best was yet to come. By the time our overpriced steaks arrived, and let me tell you, for what they were charging, these cows should have been hand-massaged by Swedish supermodels and fed nothing but champagne and caviar. The conversation had settled into a rhythm that was as predictable as it was infuriating. The Morrison family had apparently decided that I was their evening's entertainment, and they were determined to squeeze every drop of amusement out of mocking the poor, uneducated peasant who'd somehow managed to trick their precious Claire into marriage. I was about halfway through my ribeye, which was admittedly pretty damn good despite the company, when Preston decided to launch into what was clearly one of his favorite topics, the illustrious history and supreme importance of Summit Bank. You know how some people collect stamps or vintage cars? Well, Preston collected opportunities to brag about his family's financial institution like it was the eighth wonder of the world. You know, he said, cutting into his steak with the precision of a surgeon, Summit Bank has been serving this community's most distinguished families for over a century now. We're not just a bank. We're a cornerstone of financial stability for people who understand the value of tradition and excellence. Leonard nodded along like his father was delivering the Gettysburg Address instead of a corporate sales pitch. That's right, Dad. We're very selective about our clientele. It's not about the size of the account. Well, not entirely. It's about maintaining relationships with families who share our values. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud at that one. Not entirely about the size of the account. Right. Because I'm sure they were turning away billionaires left and right because they didn't have the proper breeding credentials. Marjorie dabbed at her lips with her napkin like she was posing for a painting. Oh yes, we've had to turn away quite a few. Shall we say nouveau riches? People who think that just because they've made some money, they automatically deserve access to our services. The irony was so thick you could have served it as dessert. Here they were, talking about nouveau riches like it was some kind of disease, when in their minds I was apparently so far down the social ladder that I didn't even qualify for nouveau status. I was just poor riche, I guess. It's fascinating, really, Leonard continued, clearly enjoying himself, how some people think banking is just about deposits and withdrawals. They don't understand that what we provide is so much more than that. It's prestige, connections, access to opportunities that simply aren't available to everyone. Preston raised his wine glass like he was about to make a toast. Exactly, son. Summit Bank isn't just where you keep your money. It's a statement about who you are and what you've achieved in life. Now, I'd been sitting there for the better part of 2 hours, taking their shit with a smile and the patience of a saint. But something about that particular comment, the smugness, the self-importance, the complete dismissal of anyone who didn't meet their arbitrary standards, finally got under my skin. Funny you should mention that, I said, setting down my fork and leaning back in my chair. I've actually been thinking about moving my accounts elsewhere. The effect was immediate and hilarious. All three of them stopped mid-chew like I'd just announced I was planning to rob their precious bank instead of simply taking my business somewhere else. Preston's eyebrows shot up so fast I was worried they might achieve escape velocity. "Oh," Marjorie said, trying to sound casual but failing spectacularly. "And why is that?" I shrugged, playing it off like it was no big deal. "Just shopping around, you know? Seeing what other banks have to offer. Maybe finding somewhere that's a little more, how did you put it, welcoming to different types of clients." Leonard, who had been mid-sip of his wine, actually snorted. Not a polite little cough, but a full-on, liquid coming out of his nose snort. He quickly grabbed his napkin to clean up the mess, but not before giving me a look that was equal parts amusement and condescension. "Oh, please," he said, once he'd recovered from his wine-snorting incident. "Go ahead and move your account. I'm sure losing one regular checking account won't exactly make a dent in our books." Regular checking account. Oh, sweet, naive Leonard. If only you knew that my regular checking account contained enough money to buy your precious bank 3 times over and still have enough left for a nice vacation. Preston, apparently feeling left out of the fun, decided to pile on. "Yes, Leonard's quite right. Summit doesn't depend on small timers for our success. We deal in billions, not, well, whatever it is you're working with. Small timers. Billions." The man was practically handing me comedy gold on a silver platter. Here I was, sitting across from the president of Summit Bank, while he bragged about dealing in billions and dismissed me as a small timer. It was like watching someone brag about how tough they were while unknowingly picking a fight with a Navy SEAL. "Billions, huh?" I said, taking another sip of my beer. "That's impressive." "Oh yes," Marjorie chimed in, apparently not wanting to be left out of the family sport of financial dick measuring. "Preston has grown Summit's assets under management to over $15 billion. We're one of the most successful regional banks in the country." 15 billion. I had to work very hard to keep my expression neutral at that number. See, here's the thing about my particular situation that made this moment so absolutely delicious. My primary account with Summit Bank, the one they were so casually dismissing as inconsequential, contained $7 billion in liquid assets. That's not counting my long-term holdings, my international investments, or the various other accounts I had scattered across different institutions. In other words, my single regular checking account represented nearly half of their entire bank's assets under management. But they didn't know that. In their minds, I was just some blue-collar guy with maybe a few $1,000s to my name. Leonard leaned forward with that same smug expression he'd been wearing all evening. "You know what? I'm actually curious now. What exactly would it take to keep your business? Are we talking about waiving a monthly fee? Throwing in some free checks?" The condescension in his voice was so thick you could have spread it on toast. Free checks. The man was offering me free fucking checks like I was some kind of charity case. I smiled back at him, and for the first time that evening, it was a completely genuine smile. "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm sure you're right. Losing my account probably won't even register on your radar." And that, my friends, was the moment when I decided that Preston Morrison and his arrogant family were about to learn a very expensive lesson about making assumptions. The ride home from Meridian was quieter than a funeral procession, except instead of mourning someone's death, I was quietly planning the financial assassination of an entire banking dynasty. Claire sat in the passenger seat, humming some tune she'd heard on the radio earlier, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just been declared war on by her own family. And that said husband was about to return fire with the economic equivalent of a nuclear weapon. "Well, that went well," Claire said cheerfully as we pulled into our driveway. She had this amazing ability to rewrite history in real time, turning what had clearly been a disaster into some kind of social victory. "I think they really liked you once they got to know you." I stared at her for a moment, wondering if we'd attended the same dinner or if she'd somehow been transported to an alternate dimension where her family hadn't spent the entire evening treating me like something they'd scraped off their shoe. Really? That's your takeaway from tonight? Oh, come on, she said, waving her hand dismissively as we walked toward the front door. You know how they are. They're just particular about people. But once you prove yourself, they'll come around. Prove myself. Right. Because apparently building a multi-billion-dollar business empire from scratch wasn't proof enough of anything except my lack of proper breeding credentials. I unlocked the front door and we stepped inside, Claire immediately kicking off her heels and sighing with relief. My feet are killing me. Those shoes look amazing, but they're torture devices in disguise. Claire, I said, following her into the living room. We need to talk about what happened tonight. She turned around with that slightly exasperated expression she got when she thought I was being overly dramatic about something. What about it? Look, I know they can be a little intense sometimes, but that's just their way. They don't mean anything by it. They called me uneducated trash, Claire, for 2 straight hours. They did not, she protested, though her voice had that slight uncertainty that meant she knew damn well they had. They were just curious about your background. There's nothing wrong with that. Curious? I couldn't help but laugh at that one. Your uncle offered me free checks like I was some kind of charity case. Your aunt talked about me like I was a fascinating specimen from the wrong side of the tracks. And your cousin acted like my very existence was an insult to his precious bank. Claire flopped down on the couch and gave me the kind of look you'd give a child who was throwing a tantrum over something trivial. You're being way too sensitive about this. So what if they asked about your education? So what if they made a few jokes? That's just how wealthy families operate. They test people. It's not personal. Not personal. Jesus Christ, if that wasn't personal, I'd hate to see what they considered a direct attack. They suggested you were slumming it by marrying me, I pointed out. They implied that your family would need to support us financially when my little business inevitably fails. How exactly is that not personal? Oh, please, Claire said, rolling her eyes in a way that made me want to scream. They were just teasing. You need to learn to take a joke. Besides, it's not like you don't make jokes about other people. And there it was, the moment I realized that my wife, the woman I'd thought knew me better than anyone else in the world, had absolutely no clue who she'd actually married. She saw the teasing, the condescension, the barely veiled insults, and her response was that I should just suck it up and take it like a good little peasant. Right, I said slowly. Taking a joke. Got it. I walked over to the bar cart in the corner of our living room and poured myself a generous glass of whiskey. Not because I needed liquid courage for what I was about to do, but because some moments in life require the proper ceremonial accompaniment, and this was definitely one of them. Look, Claire said, her tone softening like she thought she could smooth this over with a little sympathy. I know tonight was probably overwhelming. My family can be a lot to handle when you first meet them, but they're good people, and once they see how successful you are, they'll warm up to you. How successful I am, I repeated. Right. Exactly. Once you start doing business with Leonard, once they see how smart and capable you are, they'll realize they misjudged you. It just takes time. I took a sip of my whiskey and looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that she was just as clueless as her family. She thought successful meant making decent money as a consultant. She had no idea that her husband could buy and sell her entire family's precious bank like it was a used car. Well, I said finally, I've made a decision about Summit Bank. Oh good. Claire perked up immediately. Are you going to set up a meeting with Leonard? I knew you'd come around. This could be really great for your business. Actually, I said, savoring the moment, I've decided to close all my accounts there. Transfer everything to overseas banks. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Claire just stared at me like I'd announced I was planning to join the circus or become a professional yodeler. You're, what? She said finally. Closing my accounts. Moving my money. All of it. But why? That's completely insane. Do you have any idea how much business you could get through Leonard's connections? I had to laugh at that. Trust me, babe, I don't need Leonard's connections. This is ridiculous, Claire said, standing up and starting to pace around the living room like a caged animal. You're throwing away an incredible opportunity because your feelings got hurt? That's not how business works. My feelings got hurt, I repeated. Is that what you think this is about? What else could it be? Look, I get it. They weren't exactly warm and fuzzy tonight. But you can't let pride get in the way of smart business decisions. Moving your accounts won't hurt them. It'll just hurt you. I finished my whiskey and set the glass down on the coffee table. We'll see about that. The next morning, while Claire was still sleeping off her frustration from the night before, I called my financial advisor. Marcus Chun had been handling my portfolio for the better part of a decade, and he was one of the few people who actually understood the full scope of what we were dealing with. Marcus, I said when he picked up, it's time to move everything out of Summit Bank. Every account, every investment, every penny. I want it all transferred to our overseas partners within the next 2 weeks. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Everything? That's a significant move. Are you sure about this? Dead sure. And Marcus? Make sure they feel it. 2 weeks. That's all it took for my quiet little act of financial revenge to turn into what I can only describe as the banking equivalent of a natural disaster. 14 days from the moment I made that phone call to Marcus, and Summit Bank went from smugly dismissing my insignificant account to having what I'm pretty sure was a collective nervous breakdown. The first sign that something was happening came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my home office, sipping my coffee and reviewing some quarterly reports from my European holdings, when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. Not just one call. We're talking about a full-scale communications assault that would have made a telemarketing company jealous. The first call was from Claire, and she was practically hyperventilating into the phone. "What did you do?" she demanded, skipping right over pleasantries like hello or good morning, honey. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I'm having a lovely day. Thanks for asking. How are you?" "Don't you dare get cute with me right now," she snapped. "Leonard called me 20 minutes ago. He sounded, I don't even know how to describe it. Panicked? Terrified? What the hell did you do?" Now, I have to admit, hearing that Leonard was panicked gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling that was better than any cup of coffee. "I told you what I was going to do. I moved my accounts." "Your accounts?" Claire's voice went up about 3 octaves. "Just how much money are we talking about here?" Before I could answer, my phone started buzzing with another call. Leonard himself, according to the caller ID. I couldn't help but grin. "Hang on, babe. I think this might be important." I clicked over to the other line. "Hello, Leonard. How's your morning going? What the fuck did you do?" Leonard's voice was so high-pitched he sounded like he'd been sucking helium. Gone was the smooth, condescending tone from our dinner. This was pure, unadulterated panic. "Language, Leonard," I said, thoroughly enjoying myself. "That's no way for a banking professional to speak to a former client." "Former client? You moved $7 billion. $7 billion. Do you have any idea what you've done?" $7 billion. Hearing him say the number out loud was almost as satisfying as the panic in his voice. "I moved my money to a bank that appreciates my business. Isn't that what you suggested I do?" "This isn't a joke." Leonard was practically screaming now. "You've triggered a liquidity crisis. We had that money invested, leveraged, tied up in loans. You can't just pull out that kind of capital overnight." "Oh, but apparently I could. And I had. Funny thing about money, Leonard. When it's yours, you get to decide where to keep it." The line went quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in Leonard's brain as he tried to figure out how to fix this clusterfuck. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to what I assume was supposed to be a reasonable, let's make a deal tone. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot the other night. Why don't you come in, and we can discuss this like reasonable businessmen." "Reasonable businessmen," I repeated. "That's rich, considering you spent 2 hours telling me I was too uneducated to understand how real business works." Before Leonard could respond, my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Sir, I have Preston Morrison on line 3. He says it's urgent." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. "Leonard, I'm going to have to let you go. Your father's calling." "Wait, don't." I hung up and switched to line 3. "Preston," I said cheerfully. "What a pleasant surprise. Twice in one day, I get to talk to the Morrison family." Preston's voice was much more controlled than his son's, but I could hear the strain underneath the professional composure. "Mr. Grant, I believe there's been some kind of mistake with your account transfer." "No mistake," I said. "Everything went exactly as planned." "I see. Well, perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss this situation. I'm sure we can work something out that's beneficial for everyone." "Beneficial for everyone. I mused. You know, that's exactly what I was hoping for during our dinner the other night. Funny how perspectives change when the shoe's on the other foot. There was a long pause before Preston spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost all pretense of casual politeness. Mr. Grant, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. The withdrawal of this amount of capital has serious implications not just for our bank, but for our entire regional economy. Really? But I thought Summit Bank dealt in billions. Surely losing one little account from a small-timer like me wouldn't even register on your radar. Another pause. Longer this time. Perhaps, Preston said carefully, we underestimated the scope of your business interests. Underestimated. That was one way to put it. Perhaps you did. My phone buzzed with yet another call. This time it was my assistant again. Sir? I have Marjorie Morrison on line 4. She's crying. Crying. The woman who had spent an entire evening treating me like something she'd found stuck to her shoe was now crying because her family's bank was imploding. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Preston, I said, it sounds like your family is having quite a day. Maybe you should go check on them. This isn't over, Preston said, and for the first time, I heard real anger in his voice instead of panic. You're absolutely right, I replied. It's not. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at my perfectly manicured lawn. Somewhere across town, the Morrison family was probably having the worst day of their privileged lives, watching their century-old banking empire teetering on the edge of collapse because they'd decided to mock the wrong guy at dinner. My assistant's voice came through the intercom again. Sir, there's someone here from Summit Bank's board of directors. He says they've called an emergency meeting. I checked my watch. It wasn't even noon yet, and Summit Bank's board was already in crisis mode. Marcus had warned me that pulling out $7 billion overnight would cause problems, but even I hadn't expected this level of chaos this quickly. Tell him I'll be right there, I said, straightening my tie. Time to go watch a banking dynasty crumble in real time. And the best part? The show was just getting started. Walking into Summit Bank's main building felt like entering a war zone where the war was being fought with calculators and panic attacks instead of guns and bombs. The lobby, which normally buzzed with the quiet efficiency of financial professionals going about their business, had the frantic energy of an emergency room during a multi-car pileup. Employees were scurrying around with stacks of papers. Phones were ringing nonstop, and I could see more than a few people who looked like they were seriously considering updating their resumes. The receptionist, a young woman who probably made more in a year than most people's parents, looked up at me with the kind of desperate expression usually reserved for people who've just watched their house burn down. Mr. Grant, they're waiting for you in the main boardroom. 32nd floor, elevator bank to your right. I thanked her and made my way to the elevators, passing clusters of employees who were having hushed, urgent conversations. I caught fragments of words like liquidity crisis, emergency protocols, and how the hell did this happen? It was like walking through the financial equivalent of a natural disaster site. The elevator ride to the 30th floor was probably the longest minute and a half of my life, not because I was nervous, but because I was trying so hard not to laugh out loud that I was practically giving myself an aneurysm. By the time the doors opened, I had composed myself enough to look appropriately serious for what was about to be the most satisfying business meeting of my entire career. The boardroom was exactly what you'd expect from a century-old bank trying to prove its importance. All dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars, and oil paintings of dead white guys who'd apparently been very important at some point in banking history. But the atmosphere in the room was anything but impressive. It felt more like a funeral parlor where everyone was still arguing about how the deceased had died. Preston Morrison sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged about 10 years since our dinner 2 weeks ago. His usually perfect silver hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Marjorie sat to his right, her designer makeup doing its best to hide what appeared to be genuine distress. And Leonard looked like he'd been hit by a truck, backed over by the same truck, and then had the truck parked on his chest for good measure. Mr. Grant, Preston said, standing up as I entered the room. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Of course, I said, Taking the seat across from them like this was just another business meeting instead of the financial apocalypse I'd single-handedly triggered. I have to say, this is a much nicer venue than our last conversation. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a chainsaw. Preston cleared his throat and sat back down, his hands folded on the table like he was trying to keep them from shaking. Mr. Grant, I believe we owe you an apology. An apology? From Preston Morrison. The man who'd spent an entire evening talking about me like I was some kind of financial parasite was now apologizing. If someone had told me 2 weeks ago that this moment would happen, I'd have suggested they seek professional help. An apology for what, exactly? I asked, because I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted to hear every single word of their admission that they'd fucked up spectacularly. Preston's jaw tightened, but he pushed forward. We regret our earlier comments. They were inappropriate and unprofessional. Inappropriate and unprofessional, I repeated slowly. That's one way to describe spending 2 hours mocking someone's education and calling them a financial burden. Marjorie, who had been sitting there looking like she was attending her own execution, finally spoke up. We didn't mean, we were just. She trailed off, apparently unable to find words that would adequately explain away their behavior. Which comments, specifically, are we talking about here? I continued, because I was enjoying this way too much to let them off easy. The ones about me being too uneducated to run a business? The ones about my money not matching? Or maybe the ones about Claire needing your family's financial support when my little consulting firm inevitably fails? Leonard, who had been staring at the table like it held the secrets of the universe, finally looked up. His face was pale, and when he spoke, his voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy's. We didn't know. We had no idea about the scope of your financial position. And there it was. The admission I'd been waiting for. They weren't sorry for being assholes. They were sorry for being assholes to someone who turned out to be richer than they were. So you're not sorry for treating someone badly, I said. You're sorry for treating the wrong someone badly. Preston held up his hand like he was trying to stop a runaway train. That's not what we meant. We're genuinely sorry for our behavior, regardless of circumstances. Circumstances, I laughed. Is that what we're calling $7 billion now? Circumstances. The number hung in the air like a nuclear bomb that had just been dropped on the table. I watched as the full reality of what had happened settled over them like a heavy blanket. $7 billion. Nearly half of their bank's total assets under management. Gone. Overnight. Because they decided to play status games with the wrong guy. Marjorie's hands were actually trembling now. Mr. Grant, surely we can work something out. There must be some way to resolve this situation that works for everyone. Resolve this situation, I said. You mean the situation where your bank is now teetering on the edge of collapse because you assumed I was some kind of charity case? Leonard leaned forward desperately. Look, we fucked up. We admit it. We were wrong about everything. But pulling your money out like that, it's not just hurting us. There are innocent people who work here. People who had nothing to do with what happened at dinner. That actually gave me pause for a moment. He was right. There were probably hundreds of employees at Summit Bank who were now facing unemployment because their bosses had terminal cases of elitist assholery. But then I remembered the way they'd talked about me, the condescension, the barely concealed disgust, and my sympathy evaporated like morning dew. You know what, Leonard? You're absolutely right. There are innocent people who are going to suffer because of this. But here's the thing. They're not suffering because I moved my money. They're suffering because you and your family are apparently too stupid to run a bank without insulting your biggest clients. Preston's face was getting redder by the minute. Mr. Grant, what exactly do you want from us? What did I want? That was a damn good question. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be dismissed and belittled. I wanted them to realize that their century of inherited privilege didn't make them better than anyone else. I wanted them to learn that actions have consequences, even when you're rich and connected. But mostly, I wanted them to squirm a little bit more before I decided whether or not to completely destroy their family's legacy. I was just about to answer Preston's question about what exactly I wanted from them. And let me tell you, I had some very creative ideas brewing. When the boardroom door opened with the kind of dramatic timing that Hollywood screenwriters dream about. The whole room turned to look, and I swear you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. In walked Miles Barrett, chairman of Summit Bank's board of directors, And let me tell you something about Miles. This guy was old-school banking royalty. We're talking about a man who'd been making financial decisions since before some of these people were born, who'd survived more market crashes than most people had seen movies, and who commanded the kind of respect that made grown bankers wet themselves when he walked into a room. But here's the thing that made this moment absolutely fucking perfect. Miles Barrett and I went way back. Not in some casual, we met at a conference once way, but in a we've done serious international business together for years way. We'd worked on trade deals that involved moving more money across borders than some countries' entire GDP. He knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was worth, down to the last penny. Miles, I said, standing up with a genuine smile spreading across my face. What a pleasant surprise. The effect on the Morrison family was immediate and spectacular. Preston's face went from red to white so fast I was worried he might be having some kind of medical emergency. Marjorie's mouth actually fell open, like she was a cartoon character who'd just seen something impossible. And Leonard, poor Leonard looked like he'd just watched his entire world collapse in real time. Which, come to think of it, was exactly what was happening. Miles walked over and shook my hand with the kind of firm, respectful grip that two equals exchange when they've done serious business together. Good to see you again. Though I have to say, I wish it were under better circumstances. Better circumstances, I repeated, glancing back at the Morrison family, who were all staring at us like we were speaking in ancient hieroglyphics. Well, circumstances have a way of working themselves out, don't they? Miles looked around the table at Preston, Marjorie, and Leonard, and I could see something shift in his expression. It wasn't quite anger. Miles was too professional for that, but it was definitely disapproval of the highest order. We need to talk, he said to Preston, but his tone suggested it was less of a request and more of a direct order from the man who could fire him with a phone call. Of course, Miles, Preston said, trying to regain some composure. We were just discussing the situation with Mr. Grant here. The situation, Miles said slowly, like he was tasting something unpleasant. Is that what we're calling it? He turned to me with an expression that was part apology and part professional damage control. I want you to know that the board had absolutely no knowledge of how our staff had been treating one of our most important clients. Most important clients. The words hung in the air like a neon sign advertising the Morrison family's complete and utter failure to do their basic fucking job. I could see Leonard's face cycling through about 17 different emotions, landing somewhere between humiliation and the dawning realization that his career was probably over. Most important, Marjorie whispered, like she was afraid to say it too loud in case it made it more real. Miles looked at her with the kind of expression you'd give a child who'd just asked why the sky was blue. Mrs. Morrison, your husband's bank has been managing Mr. Grant's portfolio for nearly a decade. His account represents. He paused, apparently doing some mental math. Approximately 47% of Summit Bank's total assets under management. 47%. Holy shit. Even I hadn't realized it was quite that much. I mean, I knew $7 billion was a lot of money, but hearing it put in those terms, nearly half of their entire fucking bank, that was beautiful. That was poetry. Leonard's voice came out as barely more than a croak. Wait, you know the chairman personally? I looked at Leonard like he'd just asked if water was wet. Leonard, Miles and I have been working together on international trade projects for years. We've moved more money across borders than most countries see in their annual budgets. We've collaborated on deals involving pharmaceutical supply chains from Southeast Asia, technology transfers between European and American companies, and logistics networks that span 3 continents. Miles added, apparently deciding that the Morrison family needed the full scope of their fuck-up spelled out in excruciating detail. Mr. Grant isn't just a client. He's one of the most sophisticated international businessmen I've ever had the pleasure of working with. The silence that followed was the kind of complete, crushing quiet that usually occurs right after someone drops a nuclear bomb. Preston was staring at me like I'd just sprouted wings and announced I was actually an alien from Mars. Marjorie looked like she was about to faint. And Leonard looked like he was mentally updating his resume while simultaneously planning his suicide. But you didn't go to college, Marjorie said weakly, like this was some kind of defense against the reality that was crashing down around them. No, I said cheerfully. I didn't. Turns out you don't need a fancy degree to build a multi-billion-dollar international business empire. Who knew? Miles turned to look at the Morrison family with an expression that could have frozen lava. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You treated one of our most valuable clients with disrespect because you assumed his educational background made him, what? Unworthy of your attention? It wasn't like that. Preston started, but Miles held up a hand that shut him up faster than a power switch. Actually, let me tell you exactly what it was like, Miles said, his voice getting colder with every word. You took one look at a man who's brought more revenue to this bank than any other single client in our history, decided he wasn't good enough for your social circle, and proceeded to mock him for an entire evening. Is that about right? No one answered. Probably because what the hell could they say? Yes, we're exactly that stupid and arrogant. Miles continued, apparently not done with his verbal demolition of the Morrison dynasty. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost us? Not just the immediate liquidity crisis, but the reputation damage? Word is already spreading through the financial community that Summit Bank drove away a multi-billion-dollar client because of personal prejudice. Miles, Preston said desperately, surely we can work something out. This is all just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Miles repeated. Preston, you've been in banking for 30 years. Tell me, in your professional opinion, what do you think happens to banks that insult their biggest clients? Preston's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish that had been pulled out of water and was slowly suffocating on dry land. Miles turned back to me, and his expression softened considerably. I want you to know that the board is taking this matter very seriously. There will be consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked, genuinely curious about how this was going to play out. Well, Miles said, glancing back at the Morrison family. For starters, Preston will be stepping down as bank president effective immediately. The board has lost confidence in his ability to manage client relationships. Preston made it sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Stepping down as bank president wasn't just losing a job. It was losing the family legacy, the social status, everything the Morrison name had built over the past century. And Leonard, Miles continued, turning to the golden boy who was looking decidedly less golden by the minute. Your department head position is being terminated as of today. Effective immediately. Leonard's face went through about 6 different shades of pale before settling on something that looked like green around the gills. You can't. I mean, this isn't all my fault. Actually, Leonard, it is entirely your fault, Miles said with the kind of calm precision that made it clear this decision was final. You had dinner with one of our most important clients and decided to mock his background instead of treating him with the respect he deserved. That's not just unprofessional, it's catastrophically stupid. Marjorie, who had been sitting there looking like she was watching her entire world collapse in slow motion, finally found her voice. This is all getting blown out of proportion. It was just dinner conversation. People say things they don't mean all the time. Miles looked at her like she'd just suggested that gravity was optional. Mrs. Morrison, your dinner conversation just cost this bank $7 billion and potentially triggered the worst financial crisis in our company's history. I'm not sure how much more in proportion this situation could possibly get. I had to give it to Miles. He knew how to deliver a professional ass-kicking with style. Watching the Morrison family realize that their century of inherited privilege wasn't going to save them from the consequences of their own arrogance was better than any movie I'd ever seen. So what happens now? Preston asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miles looked at him for a long moment before answering. Now? Now you clean out your office, collect your personal belongings, and try to figure out how to explain to your wife's social circle why the Morrison family name is no longer associated with Summit Bank. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment when 100 years of banking dynasty officially came to an end, killed by nothing more than bad manners and the assumption that money always knows where it comes from. Hashtag Chapter 10 moving on. A month. That's all it took for the Morrison family's century-old banking empire to completely collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. 30 days from the moment Miles Barrett dropped the hammer on Preston and Leonard, and Summit Bank went from being a pillar of the local financial community to a cautionary tale that business schools would probably be teaching for the next 50 years. The fallout was absolutely spectacular to watch, and I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed every single minute of it. You know that feeling you get when you're watching a really good movie and the villain finally gets what's coming to them? It was like that, except instead of watching it on Netflix, I had front row seats to the real thing. Preston's resignation became official within 48 hours of our boardroom meeting. The man who had spent an entire evening lecturing me about the importance of proper education and social connections found himself updating his LinkedIn profile for the first time in 3 decades. The board didn't just ask him to step down, they basically launched him out of the building with a corporate catapult. Word through the financial grapevine was that his severance package was about as generous as a parking ticket, and his reputation in the banking community was roughly equivalent to that of someone who'd been caught embezzling from a children's charity. Leonard's professional demise was even more satisfying, if that was possible. The golden boy who had smirked at me about my high school education found himself learning what it was like to be unemployed with a resume that now included drove away the bank's biggest client through sheer arrogance as his most recent accomplishment. I heard through Claire, back when we were still speaking, that he'd been blacklisted from every major financial institution in the region. Apparently, when you cost a bank $7 billion through your own stupidity, other banks tend to view you as something of a liability. But the real cherry on top of this revenge sundae was what happened to Marjorie. The woman who had spent our entire dinner treating me like a fascinating specimen from the wrong side of the tracks discovered that her social status was directly tied to her husband's professional position. When Preston fell from grace, she fell right along with him. The country club memberships, the charity board positions, the invitations to all the right social events. All of it evaporated faster than water in the desert. I heard she'd tried to maintain her position by claiming the whole thing was just a misunderstanding, but apparently the local social elite weren't buying it. Nothing kills your standing in high society quite like being married to the guy who destroyed a century-old bank through bad manners. The bank itself managed to survive, barely, but it wasn't the same institution that the Morrison family had built. Miles Barrett and the board had to bring in emergency capital from overseas investors, restructure their entire leadership team, and basically rebuild the company from the ground up. They kept the Summit Bank name, but everyone in the financial world knew it was essentially a completely different organization wearing the skin of the old one. And Claire? Well, that's where things got really interesting, and by interesting, I mean it turned into the kind of personal drama that would have made the producers of a soap opera weep with joy. About a week after the boardroom meeting, Claire came home from lunch with her girlfriends looking like she'd been hit by a truck carrying bad news. She walked into our living room where I was reading a book about international trade regulations. Light reading, I know, and just stood there staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Is it true?" she asked without any preamble. "Is what true?" I replied, though I had a pretty good idea where this was heading. "The money. All of it. Sarah Henderson's husband works at Summit, and he told her things about your accounts that I can't even." She trailed off, apparently unable to finish the sentence. I set down my book and looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that this was the moment our marriage was either going to survive or completely implode. What specifically did Sarah Henderson's husband tell her? He said you had $7 billion in that bank. $7 billion. With AB. She said it like she was announcing that I'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness. He said you've been one of their biggest clients for years, that you own companies all over the world, that you're actually rich, I suggested. Successful? Everything you thought I wasn't. Claire sat down hard on the couch like her legs had given out. Why didn't you tell me? How could you not tell me something like that? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself a lot lately. Because I liked being married to someone who loved me for who I was, not what I could buy them. Because I enjoyed having a wife who didn't see dollar signs when she looked at me. But I had a right to know, she protested. We're married. Married people don't keep secrets like that from each other. Really? I asked. Because you seemed perfectly fine with keeping the secret that your family thought I was trash. You sat there for 2 hours while they mocked me, and you said nothing. You told me I was being too sensitive, that I should learn to take a joke. So forgive me if I'm not entirely convinced about your commitment to honesty in this marriage. That shut her up for about 30 seconds, which might have been a new record. When she finally spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more calculating. Do you have any idea how humiliated I am? My entire family is a laughingstock because of what you did. Preston's career is over, Leonard can't find work anywhere, and my mother calls me crying every day about how you've destroyed the family name. And there it was. Not, I'm sorry my family treated you terribly. Not, I should have defended you. It was, how could you humiliate my family like this? She was more concerned about the Morrison family's reputation than she was about the fact that her husband had been systematically insulted and belittled by the people who were supposed to welcome him into their family. Your family destroyed themselves, I said calmly. I just provided the consequences for their actions. Consequences? Claire's voice went up about 3 octaves. You destroyed their lives. Preston worked his entire career to build that bank, and you tore it down in 2 weeks because your feelings got hurt. My feelings got hurt. Again, after everything that had happened, after watching her family's financial empire crumble because they couldn't be bothered to treat me with basic human decency, she still thought this was about hurt feelings. Claire, I said, standing up and walking over to the window that looked out onto our perfectly manicured lawn. Do you want to know the really sad part about all of this? What? She asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't really interested in my perspective. The really sad part is that none of this had to happen. If your family had just treated me like a human being, not even with respect, just basic human courtesy, we'd all be having Christmas dinner together this year. Preston would still be running his bank, Leonard would still have his job, and Marjorie would still be queen of her little social circle. I turned back to look at her. But instead, they decided to spend an entire evening making jokes about my education, my background, and my worth as a human being. And you sat there and let it happen. Worse than that, you told me I was wrong to be upset about it. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. So what happens now? Do you expect me to just pretend that you didn't humiliate my entire family? Do you think we can just go back to normal after this? Normal? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Claire, there is no normal after this. Your family showed me exactly what they think of me, and you showed me exactly where your loyalties lie. The question isn't whether we can go back to normal. The question is whether there's anything left to go back to. The divorce proceedings started 2 weeks later. Claire claimed I had humiliated her family and made it impossible for her to maintain her social standing. I reminded her that her family had humiliated themselves and that maybe she should reconsider what was actually important in life. We agreed to disagree, and our lawyers handled the rest. The settlement was, let's call it generous. I gave Claire enough money to maintain whatever lifestyle she wanted, along with the house and pretty much everything else she asked for. Not because I felt guilty about what had happened to her family, but because I realized that holding on to someone who valued social status more than loyalty was like trying to hold on to water with your bare hands. The funny thing about money, and I mean really funny, not just ironic, is that once people know you have it, everything changes. Suddenly, I was getting invitations to charity galas, investment opportunities, and social events that I'd never been invited to before. Business acquaintances who had barely acknowledged my existence were suddenly my best friends. It was like someone had flipped a switch and transformed me from an invisible nobody into the most popular guy in town. But here's what I learned from the whole experience. When people only want to know you because of your bank account, you're not actually popular. You're just a walking ATM machine. The invitations, the friendships, the business opportunities, they were all contingent on what I could do for other people, not on who I was as a person. So I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I kept my wealth exactly where it had always been, working quietly in the background while I lived my life on my own terms. I bought a smaller house in a different part of town, kept driving my reliable car, and continued wearing jeans and comfortable shirts because that's who I was, not who my money said I should be. These days, when I walk past a Summit Bank branch, and yes, they still exist, though they're shadows of their former selves, I can't help but smile. Not because I destroyed a family or ruined careers, but because I learned something valuable about human nature. People will judge you based on the most superficial criteria imaginable, and they'll treat you accordingly. But money, real money, has a funny way of revealing who people really are when the masks come off. The Morrison family thought a high school diploma meant I was nobody worth knowing. They learned, at the cost of $7 billion and their family legacy, that education and worth aren't the same thing. Sometimes the most important lessons are the most expensive ones, and sometimes the people who need to learn them the most are the ones who can least afford the tuition. And every now and then, justice actually does have a sense of humor.